It started like any other Capitol hearing, rows of solemn faces, cameras rolling, and the usual undercurrent of tension hanging in the air. Representative Jasmine Crockett sat poised, her folders neatly stacked, a quiet storm behind her eyes. Across from her sat Marjorie Taylor Greene, unapologetically loud, as usual. She had already thrown out a few digs, mostly ignored by the committee. But then, Greene leaned forward with a smirk and uttered a line that would ignite a firestorm. "You don't even know what your job is, Jasmine. You're a diversity hire with an attitude." There was a collective gasp in the room. The moment froze. Crockett didn't flinch. She just slowly looked up, locked eyes with Greene, and said calmly, "I hope you brought legal counsel with you today, because that sentence alone just cost you millions." The silence that followed was louder than Greene's insult. Within minutes, clips of the exchange flooded social media. Hashtags like hashtag Crockett vs. Greene and hashtag diversity hire backfire trended worldwide. And then the next morning, things went from viral to official. Jasmine Crockett filed a $90 million defamation and workplace harassment lawsuit against Marjorie Taylor Greene. By sunrise, news of the lawsuit dominated headlines. Crockett vs. Greene, $90 million suit rocks Capitol Hill. Reporters swarmed both lawmakers' offices. Greene's team released a short, defiant statement calling the lawsuit political theater. But behind closed doors, her legal staff scrambled. The footage was everywhere. Legal analysts dissected every word Greene said during the exchange. Meanwhile, Crockett's legal team moved swiftly. The lawsuit cited not just the insult itself, but a pattern of verbal hostility and professional sabotage that Crockett claimed had created a toxic and discriminatory environment. One line from the filing went viral: "This is not about political disagreement. This is about sustained, targeted degradation rooted in bias and intended to humiliate." Members of Congress were split. Some publicly supported Greene, calling the lawsuit an overreaction. Others rallied behind Crockett, saying someone finally stood up to the bullying. But what really sent shockwaves through Washington was the witness list. Among the names, a bipartisan mix of staffers, journalists, and even a few Republican representatives, people ready to testify under oath that Greene had crossed the line many times. The case wasn't just about words anymore. It was about power, accountability, and whether someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene could finally be held responsible in a courtroom. Behind the scenes, Greene's team was panicking. For years, she had built her brand on controversy, loud, unfiltered, and unapologetic. But this lawsuit hit different. The evidence wasn't just circumstantial. It was time-stamped, recorded, and corroborated by witnesses who weren't easy to discredit. Clips began surfacing of previous committee hearings where Greene had launched similar verbal jabs, not only at Crockett, but at other members of color. What once passed as fiery rhetoric was now being reframed in the public eye as a pattern of targeted abuse. Crockett's legal team released a brief statement to the press: "When you use your platform to spread harm, don't be surprised when the consequences show up in court." A CNN exclusive revealed leaked deposition summaries. Several Capitol staffers admitted they'd felt uncomfortable around Greene and had documented interactions where she demeaned colleagues, often off camera. One staffer wrote, "She doesn't argue policy. She belittles people. It's like high school, but with microphones." The House Ethics Committee quietly opened a parallel inquiry. And then, another blow: a major corporate donor to Greene's re-election campaign pulled its funding, citing deep concern over the allegations and the public conduct at the heart of the case. By week's end, Marjorie Taylor Greene wasn't just facing a legal crisis, she was watching her political machine begin to collapse. Just when it seemed things couldn't get worse for Marjorie Taylor Greene, they did. Late Friday evening, a well-known political journalist released an explosive audio clip. It was a hot mic moment: Greene, speaking candidly before a closed-door strategy session, laughing as she referred to Jasmine Crockett and other colleagues as quota trophies and angry tokens. The internet erupted. The audio spread like wildfire across platforms. Overnight, hashtags like hashtag Green Exposed and hashtag Hot Mic Hate trended globally. News outlets ran it on a loop. Legal analysts called it the smoking gun. Crockett's lawyers filed a motion the next morning to amend the lawsuit, now including additional claims of malicious intent and reputational damage. But perhaps more telling than the media firestorm was the silence from Greene's usual allies. Prominent Republicans distanced themselves. A few even issued careful statements condemning all forms of bigoted rhetoric. Sponsors began pulling out of Greene's upcoming book tour. A cable appearance was cancelled. Even right-leaning commentators struggled to defend her. Meanwhile, Crockett stayed composed. In a televised interview, she said, "This was never personal. It's about drawing a line. If I don't do it, who will?" The public sentiment was shifting fast. What had started as a viral moment was now a full-blown reckoning. The halls of Congress had never felt heavier. Every glance, every whisper, every walk to the chamber doors carried the weight of the Crockett versus Greene showdown. In an emergency closed-door caucus meeting, House leadership urged Greene to lay low. But she refused. She marched into the next committee hearing flanked by a skeleton staff, determined to reclaim her narrative. Cameras were ready. Then, in a moment no one expected, Crockett walked in early, calm and silent. The room went still. She took her seat, opened a folder, and without raising her voice, addressed the committee chair. "Before we begin, I've submitted formal complaints under the House Code of Conduct and the updated harassment provisions. I'll let the evidence speak for itself." She slid over a thick manila envelope, packed with documented incidents, affidavits, transcripts, and yes, the leaked recording. Even Greene's allies couldn't ignore it now. One Republican member leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, visibly uncomfortable. That same day, the Washington Post ran a front-page headline, "Jasmine Crockett's case could redefine congressional accountability," and they weren't wrong. Capitol insiders whispered about expulsion talks. Cable news ran speculative segments on what would happen if Greene lost her seat. But the real shift came from the public. Polls showed an overwhelming majority of Americans, across party lines, believed Greene should be held accountable. And as Crockett left the building that evening, flanked by supporters and media, a chant started forming in the crowd, "Stand tall, Crockett." What was once a lawsuit was now a national movement. With the nation's eyes glued to the unfolding drama, a major television network offered both representatives a chance to speak, live, side by side, in a primetime special moderated by a neutral journalist. Against the advice of her team, Marjorie Taylor Greene agreed. The broadcast was tense from the start. Greene arrived visibly rattled, deflecting questions, accusing the media of bias, and blaming woke mobs for her troubles. But Jasmine Crockett? She was unshakable. Measured. Every word she spoke hit like a hammer wrapped in velvet. "This isn't about politics. It's about basic human respect. You don't get to stand on the floor of Congress and treat colleagues like garbage and then cry foul when accountability comes knocking." The moderator turned to Greene, asking if she stood by her now infamous remarks. Greene smirked and replied, "I say what I think. If people can't handle that, maybe they're in the wrong profession." Crockett didn't hesitate. She leaned forward, looked straight into the camera, and calmly said, "Then let's find out in court what the Constitution has to say about that." The clip went instantly viral, millions reposted it within hours, dubbing it the moment that ended Greene's career. Even conservative pundits admitted, Greene looked outmatched. And more importantly, unmoored. By the end of the broadcast, Crockett's legal fund had quadrupled in donations. A reckoning was no longer coming. It had arrived. Back in Washington, the aftermath of the live broadcast hit like a political earthquake. Staffers inside Greene's office began resigning quietly, one by one. The press got wind of internal memos, some citing ethical concerns, others simply writing, "I can't defend this anymore." Meanwhile, a bipartisan ethics panel convened a special session. Rumors swirled that senior members were seriously considering a vote to censure Greene, or even strip her of committee assignments. But it wasn't just political consequences piling up. Civil rights groups and workplace advocacy organizations filed amicus briefs in support of Crockett's case, arguing it could set a national precedent for conduct within government workplaces. Legal experts began calling it the most consequential workplace defamation case ever filed by a sitting member of Congress. Crockett herself kept a low profile. When she did speak, it was deliberate, powerful, and disciplined. People confuse loudness with leadership. But sometimes the strongest thing you can do is hold your ground, quietly, firmly, and with the law behind you. Greene, on the other hand, grew increasingly erratic. She lashed out online, posted conspiracy-laced rants, and accused Crockett of being a puppet of the deep state. But this time, even her base began to fracture. Her fundraising plummeted. Campaign appearances were cancelled. Endorsements evaporated. And then came the announcement: a formal vote was scheduled in the House to review her fitness to serve. The walls were closing in. On a stormy Thursday afternoon, the House chamber filled with an electric tension that hadn't been felt in years. The vote wasn't for a bill or a budget, it was for Marjorie Taylor Greene's formal censure. Media packed the galleries. Staffers watched from screens in their offices. Every aisle buzzed as lawmakers whispered, counted, recalculated. Crockett entered without fanfare. No cameras followed her inside. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone, the calm at the center of a political hurricane, was statement enough. When Greene entered moments later, there were boos. From both sides. Something that had once seemed unthinkable. Then the vote began. One by one, names were called. Some Republicans shocked the room by voting yeah. Democrats stood unified. Even moderates who had stayed silent for months had finally chosen a side. When the final count lit up the board, the room gasped. Censure passed, 258 to 177. Greene stood frozen. She looked to her shrinking circle of allies. No one met her eyes. The Speaker stood and delivered the official reprimand. This chamber censures Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene for conduct unbecoming of a member of Congress, in violation of both the dignity of this institution and the principles of equality it is sworn to uphold. The gavel dropped. Applause erupted, not celebration, but release. Outside, crowds gathered. Reporters swarmed. But Crockett? She exited quietly, flanked by her staff, head high, as chants of "Jasmine, Jasmine" rang through the Capitol steps. The lawsuit hadn't even gone to trial yet. But the damage to Greene's career was already irreversible. Months later, the courtroom was packed. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but that didn't stop crowds from gathering outside every day, hoping to catch a glimpse. Crockett versus Greene had officially begun in federal court, and it was already being called the trial that could reshape political accountability. Jasmine Crockett entered with her legal team and a quiet confidence. Her opening statement was concise, measured, and devastating. This case isn't about politics. It's about a line being crossed, again and again, until someone finally said, enough. Her team laid out a mountain of evidence: video clips of Greene's repeated jabs, the hot mic recording, sworn affidavits from congressional staffers, and perhaps most damning, email records where Greene openly mocked colleagues and encouraged others to keep the pressure on that little diversity queen. Greene's defense was shaky from the start. Her attorneys argued it was just political speech, but the judge cut in sharply, reminding them, political speech does not grant immunity from targeted workplace harassment. On the second day, a Republican staffer, once part of Greene's inner circle, testified, "It stopped being politics a long time ago. It was about power. And cruelty." That quote made front-page headlines. Greene sat mostly silent during the proceedings, her usual bravado replaced by long stares and whispered huddles with her counsel. But Crockett? She didn't need theatrics. Her testimony was raw, real, and unmistakably human. "I came to Congress to represent my district. I didn't expect to have to defend my dignity on a national stage." And as the trial went on, the public opinion turned not just sympathetic, but inspired. After nearly 2 weeks of testimony, evidence, and national attention, the jury returned. The courtroom was tense, every breath held, every seat filled. The judge read the verdict slowly, deliberately. "We find in favor of the plaintiff, Representative Jasmine Crockett." Gasps swept through the room. Some clapped quietly. Others just sat in stunned silence. Then came the final blow. The defendant, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, is ordered to pay $90 million in damages. Outside, reporters sprinted to their live feeds. Breaking news banners flooded TV screens and phone notifications across the country. The headline was unavoidable: "Greene found liable, Crockett wins $90 million lawsuit in historic ruling." The judgment wasn't just financial, it was a symbolic reckoning. For years, Greene had built a brand on chaos and cruelty. Now, a jury had declared it harmful, unlawful, and costly. Inside the courthouse, Crockett emerged with her head high. No gloating. No anger. Just resolve. Cameras caught her statement live. This wasn't about a payday. It was about a principle, that even in the highest halls of power, you're never above basic decency. Greene declined to speak. Her legal team issued a weak statement, vowing to appeal. But few believed it would matter. By nightfall, several key donors to her re-election campaign had publicly cut ties. Conservative strategists began whispering what had once been unthinkable: Marjorie Taylor Greene's career was over. And Jasmine Crockett? She returned to Congress the next week, not just as a representative, but as a symbol of what happens when silence is replaced with strength. The weeks following the verdict sent ripples across Washington, and beyond. Crockett's win had done more than end Greene's political career. It had sparked conversations across the nation about how public officials speak, act, and treat each other. Within Congress, new bipartisan legislation was introduced to strengthen workplace protections for lawmakers and staffers. Dubbed informally as the Crockett Rule, it aimed to codify respect as more than just a suggestion. Political commentators called it a cultural pivot. No longer could lawmakers hide behind free speech to excuse harassment and degradation. As for Marjorie Taylor Greene, her re-election campaign quietly folded. Major donors had fled. Polling placed her approval rating in the single digits. And after a failed appeal, she resigned from Congress in disgrace, never offering a public apology. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's influence soared. Invitations poured in, from civil rights panels to major news shows to Ivy League institutions. But she stayed focused. In her first speech back on the House floor after the trial, she said, "This moment wasn't just mine. It was for every woman, every black professional, every person who's been told they're too loud, or not enough. This is what happens when you refuse to shrink." The chamber gave her a rare standing ovation. Outside, people were already whispering about a future beyond the House. A Senate run. Maybe more. Because in a single viral moment, Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a lawsuit, she changed the rules of the game. Months after the historic trial, the impact of Crockett versus Greene was still being felt. Schools of law used the case as a benchmark for modern workplace harassment boundaries. Civil discourse panels across the country quoted Crockett's testimony as a new standard for professional resilience. And in Washington, something rare was happening: respect for leadership, not because it was loud, but because it was earned. Jasmine Crockett had become more than a representative. She was a symbol of accountability, of dignity under fire, of how truth, when spoken calmly and backed by action, can shake the halls of power. Marjorie Taylor Greene, meanwhile, retreated from the spotlight. Her media appearances dried up. Her allies distanced themselves. Her name, once synonymous with shock and controversy, became shorthand for self-destruction. And then, one quiet morning, Jasmine stood at a podium outside the Capitol, surrounded by supporters, press, and colleagues, announcing her next step: "I'm not finished. Because the fight for truth and justice doesn't end in a courtroom, it begins there. So yes. I'm running for the United States Senate." The crowd erupted. And this time, even the doubters were listening. Because in a time of noise and chaos, Jasmine Crockett had shown the nation what it meant to lead with clarity, courage, and conviction. And America was ready to follow.